So good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to join us today for the Social Housing Roundtable. I've lost count of how many we've done this year, but I will have a look back through. My name is Matthew Baird. I put these together and kind of co-run them with whoever's coming on with me every single week. I'm the director and founder of Baird & Co Recruitment. I've been doing social housing recruitment now for 11 years. And really enjoy it. I set up on my own 2 years ago with the idea of trying to do something that wasn't just about the money, basically. But a number of you work with me, which is great, because the more of you that do, the longer I can keep these running for free, basically. And it is the recruitment side of that keeps this running. Today, I'm very happy to have Alex Gibson with me. I think we met via LinkedIn. I tend to meet a lot of people via LinkedIn. It tends to be the way these things go. And I know Lara Daly and other people from the CIH have been on here with me previously, but this is very much a CIH kind of, I guess, overview of the Better Social Housing Review, what's kind of come out of it, what's food for thought, and everything that kind of goes with it. I am going to talk less than normal on these today because, as you can probably hear, I'm not feeling 100%. But luckily, Alex knows her stuff very, very well, so it's very good for me. If at any point you would like to get involved, use the chat function while the presentation's going on, because there'll be a short presentation to begin with any questions, and I can bring those in. But once that's over, please do use the raise hand function. I'll bring you into the conversation, because the more people we've got talking, the better it is all around. So without further ado, Alex, I'm going to pass over to you to kind of do your introductions, and then we'll start the presentation. Thank you for coming with me today.
Thanks, Matt. Fab to see so many of you here. I do recognise a few names, and I think some of them are from LinkedIn as well, to be honest. But yeah, I'm Alexandra Gibson. So I'm a Policy and Public Affairs Officer at the Chartered Institute of Housing. And I'm here today to talk to you about the Better Social Housing Review that was commissioned by ourselves at CIH and by the National Housing Federation. The review was run by an independent panel of experts, and that was including tenants, campaigners, and people who work in social housing, and it ran across 6 months. For the purpose of today, though, what I'm going to do is run through the 7 recommendations that come out of the review and what the next steps are for working together as a sector, and how we at CIH and the NatFed are going to help facilitate with that. So I will try and get through the presentation as quickly as I can, because I would really like to open the discussion up to the table, mostly for feedback on the recommendations, and I actually have a few questions for you guys as well in terms of the review. But yeah, that is generally what's going to be happening. So we'll start with the slides, please, Matt, and I'll get cracking.
No worries. I'm just finding out quickly how to do it, because I don't always do this bit. Give me just a sec and I will get started. That one? That one there. Close that, share that, and share that. That working?
Yeah, that's it. Just on to the next slide. That's all right. Brilliant. So just a quick bit of background into why the review was launched then. So I'm sure you'll all know that the poor quality of some social housing has been in the spotlight for most of last year, years previously, of course, but it's becoming a lot more prominent. Oh, the slides have gone off, Matt. Sorry. That's the one. Great. So I've just taken a few leading headlines from Kwejo Twanaboa, the social housing activist, and he actively worked with the panel on the review as a leading voice for highlighting the problems in the sector. And if you just have a look at some of the headlines there, more recently, the Housing Ombudsman, who's been a lot more vocal in highlighting severe maladministration cases. And of course, the devastating case of Awab Ishaq too, a 2-year-old boy who died as a result of damp and mold in his home. So a lot of these things have pushed us to do this urgent review. Next slide, please, Matt. And just another tiny bit more context there. So the overall quality of housing stock is actually improving, but 13% of social rented homes are still classed as non-decent versus 21% in the private rented and 16% owner occupied. With the latest Housing Ombudsman Spotlight report on damp and mould has found that maladministration cases, there was 56% of them and 64% in complaint handling. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, so it's because of these startling statistics and reports from the Ombudsman and stories from tenants and campaigners that we set out to conduct the review. So the panel spent 6 months investigating the issues that we're seeing. All social housing should feel like a home for those who live in it. It should be comfortable, it should be safe, and people should be able to live well and thrive. So it won't be a surprise that the panel uncovered that for some tenants in England living in social housing, this just wasn't the case. So the panel went on to gather insights and testimonies on how to change social housing for the better by reaching out to people with direct experience of social housing, as well as organisations with a role in providing and managing it. So the panel's now published findings and recommendations for change to the social housing sector and also to the government, and all of the recommendations have been accepted by both ourselves at CIH and the NatFed. So now we're going to be collaborating on an action plan to put them all in place, and the mission is to support housing providers to focus and deliver against the recommendations and their core purpose, which essentially shapes the report. Next slide, please, Matt. So the review panel looked at the quality of social housing in England through a number of different lenses, and that was including the challenges of managing and developing housing stock, the culture, the complaints and communication, stigma and discrimination, tenant voice and power, sustainability, workforce health, and access to data and information. Next slide, please. Okay, so the recommendations, and there's 7 of them. The first one is that every housing association and the sector as a whole should refocus on their core purpose and deliver against it. So in a system under pressure at the moment, housing providers need to go back to test their performance against their core purpose. That's what we're saying. So this is just to provide the decent, safe homes for those who can't afford the market. So when housing providers can demonstrate that they're delivering against the purpose, they should then review again whether and what further capacity they have available to continue to deliver against wider responsibilities and ambitions. So the review recommends that as part of this renewed purpose, the sector should be doing more to challenge and break down the stigma and discrimination still faced by people who live in social housing, and that's both in society as a whole and within the social housing sector itself. Next slide, please, Matt. Brilliant. So the second recommendation is that housing associations should work together to conduct and publish a thorough audit of all social housing in England. So there's currently no comprehensive or consistently measured picture of the state of social housing stock across the country. So different housing providers have varying approaches to auditing their stock and expressing data. The review itself promotes that housing providers should be working together to undertake a comprehensive national audit of social housing. The panel recommends that they should do this by adopting and applying the new Hacked UK housing data standards right across the sector. So CIH and the NatFed, in partnership now with housing providers, are going to start to develop a set of indicators on the condition of homes and who lives in them. So we're going to be building on best practice and current approaches to understanding the condition of the homes, including stock condition surveys, and we're going to aim to work with our members and also the wider sector to become exemplar when it comes to understanding the condition of our homes, because at the moment we're not very good at that. Just go on. Right, I'm back, sorry. Yeah, so at the minute we're going to be asking providers to commit to collecting and reporting information, and we'll seek to work with the government and the regulator of social housing to ensure that the indicators work with the current and potentially revised decent home standard. Next slide, please, Matt.
Is that the one I'm on, number 3?
Number 3.
Yeah,
that's great. So number 3 was housing associations should partner with tenants, contractors and frontline staff to develop and apply new standards defining what an excellent maintenance and repairs process looks like. So you'll know that there's widespread concerns growing about how too many housing associations and providers manage the maintenance of the housing stock and respond to concerns and complaints about this raised by tenants. And again, this is being highlighted more so now in all of the Housing Ombudsman reports. So what we're saying is that each housing association should ask tenants, frontline staff and contractors to work together now to review how the organisation deals with their repairs and maintenance systems. So we're hoping that they're going to develop new standards now together to be applied to review the organisational performance and then develop an annual plan for continuous improvement, and that's the most important part. Next slide, please, Matt. Okay, so the 4th recommendation is specific to the CIH, and it's that we should promote the traditional housing officer role as a supported and valued employment opportunity with a CIH recognised programme of training and continuing development. I keep crashing. Apologies. Okay, yeah, so I think the one thing here is that there's exceptional pressures and demands on frontline staff at the minute working directly with tenants. And I think there's a very high turnover rate at this level, and that's making it harder for many tenants to communicate with their landlord. So the report's recommending that housing providers should increase investment in recruiting, developing and supporting the retention of housing officers to enable them to re-establish more manageable patch sizes. So what we're going to do is we're going to redefine the housing officer role. We're going to set out routes into the career from school, higher education and other professions, as well as setting out onwards progression routes and continuous professional development. So we're going to work with the sector to embed professionalism across social landlords in a way that provides tenants tenants with regulatory assurance. And us and the NAFED will develop and deliver a plan to promote this role as an exciting and valued employment opportunity as well. So we just want to be able to demonstrate where the sector has gone further in investing in customer facing roles and processes to ensure that tenants are getting the best service possible. Next slide, please, Matt. The next recommendation is that housing associations should work with all tenants to ensure that they have a voice and influence at every level of decision making across the organisation through both paid and voluntary roles. Again, there's widespread concerns that tenant voice, specifically, and the diversity of that voice often gets lost in a sector where a sector that's under pressure, where leaders can be distanced from realities of tenant experience. So what we need to be doing is recognise tenants as key partners in delivering sector purpose. So the report recommends that all housing providers should assess their performance against tenants' experiences by empowering them to lead investigations and reviews, and should expand the roles they can play across the organisation. Next slide, please, Matt. And number 6 is housing associations should develop a proactive local community presence through community hubs, which foster greater multi-agency working. Keep crashing again. So I think with this one, it's that too many tenants are concerned about reduced face-to-face contact with landlords, and rightly so. And this ties in with the promotion of the housing officer role. So internal silo working and lack of commitment to external multi-agency working is now reducing the efficiency and impact of housing providers. So what they should be doing now is that we should be actively seeking to create more community-based hubs. And I would like your feedback, if you have any, on how these work and if any of you run any of these, either by engaging with existing ones or actively setting up new ones. So the hubs should actively reflect the needs and aspirations of the community and be based on the principle of go where the tenants are. Next slide, please, Matt. And the last recommendation of the report is that housing associations should support tenants and frontline staff to undertake an annual review of the progress each organisation is making in implementing the review's recommendations. So for the review and the recommendations to have actual impact, housing providers should now work with their tenants and frontline staff to examine how well they're doing in terms of implementing them, and to find ways to overcome the challenges and barriers that they face in doing so. So CIH and the NAFED are now going to be working actively with housing providers to support them to set up approaches, either through new or existing arrangements and structures, to implement tenant and staff oversight of progress against the Better Social Housing Review. This work's now ongoing, and we're having many conversations with tenants, with housing providers, and again, like I said, we've started the conversation, and that's why I'm here today as well, to get your input. But I think more so it's about how you're supporting tenants to monitor the progress against the recommendations. Tenants should be leading this, and we will be sharing some specific examples in the coming weeks from this as well. So next slide, please, Matt. Okay, so I'm just going to open it up to the round table now. Initially, just for your response. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the review and the report in full, but just your feedback and your thoughts on those recommendations would be most welcome. And then I'm going to ask if we can go through these couple of questions as well. That would be very helpful for me.
No problem at all. There's already been some stuff that's come up, and thank you for sharing those today. There's some really interesting points there. The first thing that came up was actually from Val Knight, which was related to the point around the audit. There needs to be an audit of how many homes are disabled friendly for all diverse needs. Is there anything going on within the audit kind of really breaking down into, I guess, a diversity of home type, as well as as well as the other parts that are going to be discussed on that audit?
Well, this is something that I would ask members of the roundtable today, because this is something that we need to understand from housing providers as to how they collect this data and how they're doing their audit. And that would make the most sense. But if anybody has anything to add to that or has any examples of how they're doing that, that would be brilliant.
I think a lot of that's going to come down to voice and working with the repairs and assets team, isn't it? But as you say, it's that more collaborative kind of conversation. And if anyone wants to come in on that, please say.
Yeah.
A second question, which came from Rachel. How will this apply to local authorities? This was the point on the initially on the audit, but also on the repairs and maintenance. But I think in general, how will this apply to local authorities also to ensure that stock and those customers aren't missed? So obviously a lot of this was focused on housing associations. Will it also be tied in with the local authority?
It is, and we're looking at that now. So it is predominantly aimed at housing associations, but a lot of the feedback we've had is that nobody in local authorities is able to adapt this because we haven't specifically put it out to them. But we're just in the middle of conversations about how we can then roll this out and apply this to local authorities. So that is something that will be coming out in the next couple of weeks as well.
Absolutely brilliant. If anybody would like to come in at any time, by the way, please raise your hand. I'd love for you to kind of come through. Lizzie Spring, if new housing staff are trained by people currently working in the sector, how can new and better practices be taught?
Sorry, Matt, you were going a little bit off there. Is it in the?
So yeah, it said if new housing staff are trained by people currently working in the sector, how will new and better practices be taught?
That's a very interesting one, Lizzie, and it's something that that's had me thinking as well. From a CIH perspective, what we're going to be doing is developing new qualifications and going down that route. So we're going to be opening it up to schools and universities more so, and we're going to be running the qualifications. In terms of housing providers working in the sector and upskilling people, we're just hoping that they're going to be adopting our professional standards, and that is kind of the route that we're going down at this moment in time in terms of housing providers and who they employ to deliver this training. Again, it is something that I can't say, but we can only promote our professional standards and our qualifications through that route.
I think it's about trying to make sure that housing providers are ensuring anybody who is delivering training are those who've been through courses such as yours and who have actually listened to best practice and been involved in this conversation, because that's where things go wrong.
It is, yeah. And I think a lot of the customer facing roles, especially in call centres, we don't want it to just be an interim job where people are then just trying to move on to the next thing. It has to be as important as, you know, the repairs and maintenance service or the chief executive's job. The forward facing people in call centres and housing officers are the most vital here, and these are the people who, you know, the job at the moment, I feel as if it doesn't have enough recognition for how important it is. I mean, we want to draw the right people in who have a passion for it as well. I'm
going to go to Sophie Hayward. I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Alex. I think it's really interesting, and obviously there's a lot of I think for housing associations there's a lot of conflicting priorities at the moment, and it's really tough to sort of try and figure out which one to tackle first. I've just this morning been at a meeting to discuss the rent review that's obviously coming in with the rent increases. And somebody in the chat has put a point which I kind of agree with as well. It's the difficulty in sort of focusing on the core purpose, which is, you know, delivering good quality housing and that kind of thing, and repairing homes and housing people. And then it's almost kind of like the nice to haves, which is the sort of the nice engaging side, which I feel really strongly about. But currently I'm struggling to do that because of the restrictions in terms of finances and the pull on resources, and the heavy focus on, you know, and because housing itself has been in the news a lot recently. So therefore we are having to really focus on these damp and mold cases as an example. I completely agree with every single one of those recommendations, and in a perfect world would absolutely love to deliver every single one of those. But where in my current role, I definitely feel restricted in what I can do. So I guess that's kind of an answer to one of the questions on this slide in the terms of challenges. It's having those conflicting priorities across the sector as a whole, but also a real pull on resources. I'm sure I'm not the only one working for an organisation that's going through a massive remodel restructure at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably apparent, that's a regularity across the whole of the sector, as well as mergers as well, which again, it's to keep you sort of going and keep you viable whilst also still trying to deliver. It's really, there's a lot of constraints on us at the moment.
Yeah, I bet. Sophie, what is your job title? Sorry.
I'm a neighbourhood team manager.
Right, okay.
You're very much dealing with that kind of front line every day then.
Yeah. So very much frontline. So my team are out in our neighbourhoods, speaking to residents all, sort of all day, every day. And for them, I know they really want to make a positive impact on residents, and they want to have that really positive engagement, be sort of an ambassador for the organisation. But currently they are sort of being met with barriers, because it is a hot topic on, repairs, damp and mould, all that kind of stuff. And now it's going to be, I imagine, cut over the coming weeks as rent letters hit doormats, it's got to be the rent increase as well from April. So it's just, as I say, it's a challenge. We kind of have a core purpose, and then you have the nice to haves, but I think the nice to haves are actually really important as well. And the engagement side of things, as I say, is something that I feel really strongly about and want to involve residents as much as we can. But yeah, we've just got sort of feel like you've been pulled in lots of different areas and different directions at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was chatting to somebody, a repairs guy, who was telling me that he, in one day, he went from having I think it was something like 14 cases to go and repair, and the next day he had, as a result of a lot of what Michael Gove put out, and we sent a letter out to housing providers about the damp and mould, he then had 74 houses to visit in one day. Now obviously he went back to his manager and said, I can't do that in one day, but then they don't also have the team to do it. So yeah, it is a huge resource issue, but again, that sits with government, and I've got a bit of an issue at the moment with, don't get me wrong, I think it's great that Michael Gove is pushing the damp and mould issue as the problem that it is. That's totally correct. But I'm almost starting to feel like it's becoming one of those things where if you don't get that element right, you're not going to get any more money. Well, then we can't get that right without any money.
Yeah.
So it's now becoming a bit of a push and pull. That work very well. But yeah, thanks, Sophie. That's really interesting.
Thank you.
I'm going to bring in Mal, and then I've got Rachel. So Mal, over to you.
Hi Matt, thanks very much. I'm sorry, my camera's not working, so I've probably saved you the debate about looking at me. I just want to pick up a point, Alexandra, that right at the beginning of your presentation where you mentioned housing providers need to go back to their original social purpose, which was providing good quality housing. And that's a real challenge now for the sector, because we have developed. So I'm old enough to remember housing associations being formed, municipalities and various other routes. And for decades, our priority has been to provide additional housing through new build development. And many providers are now, dare I say it, slaves to their bonds. And the funding regime at housing associations, the way in which we provide our services, changed significantly from those early days. So those bonds require us to retain a level of surplus, and we are the slaves to those bonds. So did the review actually look at that side of things, which this bond issue and the surplus issue is impacting how much we actually spend on our existing stock? Well, it has done over time, and it's going to be a large tanker to turn to get that reinvestment back into our existing housing stocks.
Yeah. In terms of if the review looked at that, it was taken into consideration, except the review mostly was dominated by tenant and campaigner voices as to what the issues in social housing were. And again, a lot of it fell back on repairs and maintenance. I think what would be really helpful, Mal, because I mean, on the back of this roundtable, is that we're hoping to work with yourselves and work with people on the issues that you're bringing up, is if we could have a conversation about this, because we're going to obviously, the action plan is forever expanding, and it's because of issues like this that you're facing, and challenges that essentially stop you from delivering on the core purpose. So I mean, that doesn't necessarily answer your question, but it would be good to have a conversation off the round table about this, and then you can work with us on delivering the action plans. If that would be something you'd be interested in, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, really interested, but you'll need a few of my finance colleagues, or if there are any finance colleagues on the call, they're really integral to that, especially treasury managers, treasury directors.
Well, I can definitely do some outreach there as well. And I think it's certainly interesting that when we look at that kind of core purpose, I guess one of the core purposes of a housing association that isn't a traditional core purpose but has become one is developing stock, because nobody else is building the stock. And yet that then pulls you so far from where I guess businesses used to be, but then some RPs have almost gone too far in that direction and not looked after their existing ones. So it's an interesting balance. Rachel, I'm going to bring you in. Then there's a few points in the chat that I'm going to jump to. So Rachel, good to have you with us.
I was just to be honest, I was picking up on the point that Sophie made and that I think Lindsay made in the chat about, you know, the difference between point 1 and point 6, obviously the focusing on core services, but for us specifically, for point 6, so we have 5,000 properties, but across the whole of North of England, we work in about 43 different local authority areas. So that kind of recommendation around community hubs and, you know, having that community presence, we do it, but obviously on one-off thing to try and set that up, because we can have independent living schemes that are 50-60 miles from anything else, and that would be a massive impact and resource to try and do that in all the communities that we have properties within and where our customers live. It would be a massive impact. And then, like I say, then it kind of contradicts point 1 about focusing on core services. And I do think it's really important. My title is customer performance manager. I'm responsible for engagement, for scrutiny, for involvement, but that to actually to be able to deliver that, it's I think it's a bit what Sophie said, it's about one of the nice to haves, but the actual resource that we go, especially to an organisation like ours, like I say, that we span hundreds of miles, it would have a massive resource implication to that.
Yeah, I'll be honest, we were a little bit foggy with this recommendation because of that reason. So this one, I'm not sure if it's going to remain. It depends what we can understand and whether or not it's feasible for housing providers to do this. But it's interesting what you say about the contradicting, obviously delivering against the core purpose and being able to actually resource what you need. But yeah, the community hubs one, in an ideal world, if we had the resource, they would be everywhere. But we appreciate that isn't the case. But yeah, I think for that point, Rachel, it is the community hubs one. We're just testing the waters a little bit to see whether it's a thing that can work.
I think you're right about it being the ideal world, because obviously I think that would be the dream that we had these. And actually in an ideal world, would it be that housing associations that deliver in several areas work together to develop them community hubs? And so it's not just the other agencies in regards like police and mental health and things like that, but it will be such an organisational thing so when you've got the focus on core services, the kind of it was how that would be managed and resourced.
I think it's trying to work out what an alternative to community hubs would look like that wouldn't be such a burden on resource. I don't know if you've got any ideas around that, if there's anything else that you guys do that would, you know, be in place of a community hub or community centre, but something that's not quite as burdensome on resource.
I think what's interesting, like I do last year, I did a lot of recruitment with Bromsgrove District Housing Trust. Now, by their very name, they are in Bromsgrove, they are local to that area, they've got a community hub, it works really well, and they've brought in a couple of new roles, such as a community coach. I can definitely put you in touch with a couple of people over there, Ashley and Emma in particular, very good. But I think housing has had a big shift over the last decade away from that kind of community one area focus to being, some of these are massive providers, and how you try and combat that, I don't know, because as you say, it's a challenge, and Rachel's highlighted hers there. Lindsay, I'm going to bring you in just a moment because the points in the chat. We had a look at those ones. So Lindsay I love the idea of more people coming purposefully into the sector rather than falling into housing like many of us did. Housing promoted as a career at schools and career fairs, couldn't agree more with that. I ran a live roundtable at the end of CIH 2022, day one, on this actually, which was about apprenticeships in housing and things like that. But there seems to still be a bit of as someone else has mentioned in the chat later on about the apprenticeships and the apprenticeship levy, there's so much money to be used for getting people into this, but people still don't know about the sector. And I imagine that's probably a struggle you've got, Alex, is trying to get young people to even know what this sector is all about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with that. I don't remember seeing housing or housing standing out to me when I went to university or college or anything else. And I am one of those people who used to say I fell into housing. I'm not sure why we adopted that phrase. It's become part of part of the sector. But I think if we can start pushing it out through schools and through colleges and universities, it's a good start, but it needs to be promoted a lot more than what it is, 100%.
Lizzie Spring, I'm concerned that the approach is clientising and therefore potentially demeaning. How can the huge amount of professional experience and expertise on tenants be commissioned to improve on landlord understanding and implementation of good standards, of good practice? A huge amount of professional experience and expertise of tenants. So you're saying there about kind of obviously the tenant voice there being at every single level.
Not the tenant voice. Can I speak?
Yes, you can, Lizzie. Yeah, please do.
I'm not sure if I could be heard. I'm not used to Zoom. I'm retired, so I'm a pre-Zoom person. I'm not talking about the tenant's voice, which is one of my least favourite phrases anyway. I'm talking about tenant expertise. People like myself, of whom there are tens and tens of thousands renting from housing associations and councils, who've worked in the public and voluntary sector, or in my case, have worked as the chief exec of a small housing association. We've got an enormous amount of professional experience, which is partly why so many of us have become housing activists and campaigners, because we're trying to, initially, we were trying to help our landlords improve. And then when refused entry into any of their closed rooms, became angry and began campaigning against our landlords. But many, many, many of us would prefer to move forward to genuine partnerships. I am 69, so retired last year. But before that, had a 40-year career, mostly in the voluntary sector, but about 8 years in housing. And I'm hugely expert at community work, listening to people, developing policies, ensuring policies are implemented, improving people's work practice without being punitive, all the stuff the third sector does as a matter of course. So it's hugely jarring to see the housing sector not doing those things properly and referring to the tenants, many of us, I mean literally thousands and thousands of us who have qualified experience in doing those things. We're talked about entirely as beneficiaries or people who should be going to community hubs rather than going to work during the day. And I think it's a real, I've spoken about this with Matt some months ago, I think it's a real problem, because we're such a huge resource and we are just not drawn upon. There are no skills audits, as far as I know, most landlords to actually draw upon and commission us as consultants to help them improve. I would rather poke my eyes out than go to a community hub, but I'd love to go and do some asset-based, strengths-based training with my landlord's senior staff team. And those options are just not in your suggestions. And I've spoken to loads of people at CIH over the years about this, when I was a CIH member or when I was on the National Tenants Voice and so on and so on. It's a shame to me. I think you're missing a trick.
I think there was a point there, just in terms of, I mean, to play devil's advocate a bit on point 5, which was, you know, I mean, if you get rid of that tenant voice, but if you get rid of the voice, it says housing associations should work with all tenants to ensure they have an influence at every level of decision making through both voluntary and paid roles. And I guess that's, I mean, Alexandra, I don't want to put words in the CIH's mouth, but I know this is something which, I'm speaking with people like Lara Daly, who's very...
The paid roles were the paid roles that were suggested were for tenants to train other tenants. And what I would love is if the housing sector had the intelligent humility to trawl the tenant body for those of us that could train the staff.
But are there not adverts that go out that people can apply to on the flip side? So surely when an advert goes out, can a tenant not apply for those roles?
No, I mean, I don't know what you mean by the advert. There are no roles. I have never seen a role. I've not seen any roles advertised ever to train senior management teams and boards in better community
work, in listening skills, in asset-based, strengths-based approaches.
Oh, I guess that's why you hire a consultant. But I get what you mean. It's a very, yeah, it's definitely a fair point. There's a next one, the thing before I go, because Lindy, I'm sorry, I kept you waiting there for a little bit, but Lindsay Driscoll said there's definitely training there through external providers. I'd love to see the government release some of the apprenticeship levy for organisations to do this. And
I'd love to know what Alexandra thinks before you go on to the next question, because it's the CIH I was hoping would answer that.
To be honest, Lizzie, I think I would have said similar to Matt. I think with the paid voluntary, and I must stress as well, the recommendations that come out from the panel, we have accepted them, but we're trying to work through them as much as yourself. I agree with you. I'm trying to understand how it would look if a job advert went out. Would it be an advert that was specifically aimed at tenants, but as a professional job role within the organisation?
Yes.
Or, for example, if a job title came out, say, learning leader, something similar to that, would it specifically have to say for a tenant? Or
I had a lot of meetings with Melanie Rees before she retired from CIH. We when I worked in housing, it was much at the same time as her, so we had a lot of conversations about how different the sector is now to how it was in the 80s and 90s when we were young housing managers, when most people working in the housing associations we worked for were also tenants themselves. So it was peer work far more than it is now. And what I suggested was to develop a pool of tenants across the country to work as consultants for the whole sector to draw upon. So we were working with the CIH, and now that they've got much stronger powers with the Ombudsman and regulator, as equal peer experts. So yes, it would be for tenants. It wouldn't be going to work for housing associations or councils. It would be to act as a pool of consultants, so that you turned angry activism into positive support, and we work together in partnership. I'm, as I said, 69, I'm getting on for 70. It's exhausting to keep bashing on the doors which are locked by people half our age who aren't drawing on our expertise. And I've given up, but I know there are a lot of people 10, 15 years younger than me with similar work skills and training who would be more than happy and capable to do this sort of stuff. And I would love to work with CIH to develop it, and have offered to, but it's a long time ago now.
Of course, So I mean, we run things like our policy advisory committee and all of those type of things. Is that something you would be interested in doing, or would you want something a lot more, consultancy and a paid role where you can go in and?
Yes, I can't afford to work for free, and 95% of my state pension goes to pay my rent, so it would feel a bit galling to also work for free for the housing sector. And Mark, when he was running 24 Housing, used to always pay me for my articles. Which was wonderful, thank him for me. It's that sort of very, very basic normal respect that I think is missing in a few of these new suggestions. Please scrap the phrase tenant voice, and say tenant power, tenant influence, tenant contributions. Anyway, I'll shut up now.
No, thank you, Lizzie. Honestly, it's really useful. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Lindsay Hunt-Slade, thank you for being patient. Do come in.
Morning. Thank you, Matt. It was just to, I suppose, maybe annoyingly take Alexandra back to the conflicts around the first recommendation with the recommendation 6 around investing in the community hubs and building those resources, working with others. I'm interested in a couple of things. One, I suppose, is that a tension that was recognised internally whilst you were producing the report, and what's the thinking really around including that? Because it feels, do you see that as a nice to have? Internally, where we're discussing next corporate plan and core purpose, core services, and where we need to invest, and we look to documents like this to give us that sector steer. It feels like the lack of clarity is actually unhelpful.
Okay.
And are, you know, how do you want us to respond to the conflict in those recommendations?
Exactly as you're doing, I suppose. I think with point 6 and with the community hubs, I think we're just trying to promote greater multi-agency working and get out of the silo working. It's a really difficult one because the reason I'm here today is to get this kind of feedback from you. We haven't actually produced the action plan yet, it's in draft. So these kind of conversations are what we need to be having. And again, outside of this roundtable, if you want to help us work on the action plan to address those problems, that is just that would be perfect. But again, I do appreciate that the lack of clarity around them is quite frustrating, because it is frustrating for us as well, because we have just adopted this from the panel, and now we're working with you guys to try and understand how it would work and if it would work and what your constraints are. Sorry, I can't really answer it much more than that, Lindsay.
I think that's okay. I think, you know, the whole point in these roundtables sometimes is just to get a feel for where things are and going, right, well, we're going in the right direction with this and not with the other one. And Val Knight put there's a lack of social homes. It's becoming more affordable rents that people struggle to afford and then get penalised for it. And obviously, Lizzie's mentioned there 95% of her pension goes to her thing. So I think there's a balance there as well, which I guess goes back to core purpose of what it was designed for. But equally, affordability now is so difficult in itself. It'll be interesting to kind of see how many advice teams are still working. Lindsay Driscoll, housing organisations working together to deliver community hubs is a great idea. Couldn't agree more. I think that's based off Sophie's point and who else made the point earlier? I can't remember who it was. Rachel, wasn't it, who mentioned that point about how we can collaboratively kind of go. And I guess you'd need more direction from the CIH on that one as well. And Janine Hayward, we're trying to work closer with other partner agencies and other housing associations to work at provision and community support. Is that something you're seeing more and more of, Alexandra? Is that housing associations work, you know, wanting direction from yourselves of how to work more collaboratively with each other?
Yeah, a lot of it. And again, it comes down to resource and being able to channel resource into each other and do that. I mean, they don't necessarily come to us for advice on how to do that, but we are getting a lot of feedback, and then that is what everyone is trying to do now, is work together, multi-agency, especially with supported housing as well. We're seeing a lot of that. But yeah, I think in terms of, again, it goes back to these community hub things. If we can work together to produce them, that's great. But I think working together with partner agencies just to understand the geographies of tenants and to work together to tackle stigma, especially because I know someone's just mentioned that up there, that it helps to tackle stigma, then understanding each other's you know, geographies is the best thing that we can do, and understand how each other's working and just learn from each other in terms of best practice for tenant engagement as well, and tenant influence, as Lizzie said.
I think, yeah, as you said, I mean, Lindsay Driscoll there mentioning about stigma. There's so much stigma across different lines. You know, you have stigma of tenants, you have people's stigma of what a housing association is for, of it as a career and what that means. I think there's a lot of breakdown to be done there. But Alison, great to have you with us. Do please come in.
Hi, yeah, sorry I was late, but I have read the report, so hopefully I'm not going to duplicate anything. But I just came in on the discussion about communities and housing associations working together and maybe needing some help to think about how they could do that, which is quite saddening on some levels. I just wonder if there's I've not seen anything in the actual report, whether this is an opportunity to revisit, I can't remember what they called it now, stock rationalisation in terms of the footprint of different housing associations. So, for example, you sometimes get a local authority estate that's been transferred to a housing association, and within that estate, a different housing association's built a few bits, and all that kind of waste and coordination, and whether there's something about putting that back on the agenda so that we've got a single landlord in an area, just to make some of these linkages a bit easier. I mean, it's a long time since it's been mentioned, but I think there's I think it happens that certainly community, where I used to work in Bradford, the housing officers would use the community centres, and maybe everyone's housing officers could use a community centre, but some of those community venues are disappearing as well. So I sometimes think that the less cooks you've got in the mix, you've more chance of having an impact. I don't think there's anyone here from the regulator.
What are your thoughts on that, Alexandra?
Is Alison still there? I've just a bit, yeah. I totally agree with you, and I'm with you on it. I wasn't sure if it was a question or not, Alison, because it went a little bit sort of sketchy at the end. So I got what you said about too many cooks spoiling the broth. But then I'm not sure what it kind of went a bit jittery. So was it a question, sorry, at the end?
It's really whether you think that there's an appetite, or it's something we need to get into the discussion about. A lot of I have this rant every week on this round table about back to the 90s and housing offices and patch sizes, but in order to achieve that, is there something about the asset base as well to make that easier, so that whilst we've got more local presence, more people working in different ways, but we're not going against that by different systems, processes, improvement programs, regeneration, all being run by different landlords.
Yeah, so back to basics essentially is what you're saying, and especially in terms of like asset and patch sizes, or
definitely. But it's whether there's an extra layer to that around the fact that some estates have multi-landlords, and whether there should be some sort of enforced rationalisation of stock swaps and stuff like that.
Okay, well, it's interesting because in terms of the estates having multi-landlords, again, that's not really something I've had to think about, but now you mention it, I think that's where things get lost, definitely, and you're not sure if one landlord's dealing with a problem or a complaint, or if the other landlord's dealing with a problem or complaint, and this is where things get lost in the system. But I think it's a conversation to be had as to whether or not this is the issue that we're having, and why things are going missing, where things are going lost. Are too many people dealing with one thing at a time and not communicating with each other? I think so. But yeah, no, thanks, Alison. That's interesting as well.
So just for clarity, in that situation, it might be an external thing around estate management if there was lots of landlords. But within a single landlord, my issues usually around the specialised working, which has its merits, but it can enable things to get lost quite easily.
Yeah.
If Claire Patterson was here, she'd be talking about the data, I can promise you that. Sophie Hayward, great to have you with us. Do come in.
Thank you. Yeah, just following on the back of what Alison was just saying, and what we were saying earlier on about the community hubs. I actually think community hubs are a great idea, and in my experience, they have worked really well in bringing communities together, and not just residents from one particular block estate, but actually surrounding areas. And just touching on what Alison was saying, I completely agree that you do have estates where there might be multiple landlords, and that does present challenges. Something that we've done recently is we've got a borough where we've got a high concentration of properties, but also other landlords as well. And we've actually, excuse me, worked really closely with a local councillor, because the one constant, if you like, is that they all have the same councillor. So whilst you might have 4 landlords in the same area, and what we've done is we've worked with a local councillor it was our organisation and 3 others, to develop what is called a community ambassador role. And it's kind of housing association blind, and it's to try and instill more of the community feel. So yes, whilst you might be housed by L&Q, for example, and you need to speak to them about X specific case or whatever it is, there's also, it's really helped to sort of instill a community feel, because it might be that whilst you're walking your dog in the local park, you see something that is still within your community, but you wouldn't necessarily report to your housing provider, but it's still a community-based element. It's where you live, you've got a vested interest in it. So that's something that's kind of helped to really, and it was worked on for a long time. It was all done very slowly and meticulously, and it's working really well. So we found that to kind of, we've only done it in one borough, albeit, but we found it to be quite a useful way, and it brought 4 housing associations together who all have that interest in that same area. So yes, that was just really helpful.
Is that voluntary, Sophie? Is that
Yeah. So yeah, it's, if you were to be a community ambassador, it's a resident living in that area, so it's a voluntary role. But you they did create a role within the borough that's a part-time paid role as the coordinator, so the person that actually looks after the community ambassadors. that was within Richmond, London Borough, Richmond upon Thames, if you wanted to look into it. There may well be similar ones in other boroughs.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks.
Mel Sagu, I'd seen you raise your hand. Did you still want to make your point, or should I jump to the chat?
Yeah, just a quick one, to pick up a point on housing stocks. I think there is a general consensus, or there is an understanding in central government that housing providers, be they local authorities or housing associations, have got large estates which, through no fault of their own, through lack of investment, age now. So we talk about pre-war stock estates that need significant regeneration. And although we can provide some funding to that, and private providers can provide funding towards that, there is a need to regenerate our housing, especially our social housing in this country, and that's going to take a large amount of investment. And that's where I think they're also struggling as well. I'm harking on about finances, complete finances. I'm to just make clear, I'm not a finance person.
No, Mal, it's right though, and this is what I'll go back to what I was saying about the issue with damp and mould at the moment, and how I can't help but feel that the government is now using it as an excuse not to give the sector more money to sort out the issues that we have, because stock needs upgraded. There are millions of homes that are energy inefficient across this country, and that contributes to damp and mould and everything else. And it's we fight the good fight all of the time about investment in social housing, and it falls on deaf ears. And I think a lot of the time we're just trying to do what we can, but you make very good points.
It's a challenge, certainly, and I think there's the whole piece within the finance of how housing associations are run. Some have got a lot of money and some don't have very much at all. But I agree with you completely that some of the way that funding is allocated is very bizarre. Val Knight said housing associations should listen to their front-facing staff, as they are the ones dealing with residents, and they do have good ideas to improve the service. And I couldn't agree more with what Val said there. One of the reasons I put these roundtables together was that I didn't mind, or didn't care really, if you were a frontline customer service, someone who's 2 months into the role, or whether you've been in the industry for 20 years. Your voice is just as valid on these roundtables. And actually, sometimes I can't remember who mentioned it earlier, but you need those new ideas coming through.
And is there anybody on the call today who is front facing that feels they are listened to from senior, from exec, or from boards? Do you feel like you get asked for your opinion? Is there anyone that feels like they don't? Do you feel like you don't have a voice within your organisation?
Yes. Can I just jump in? Sorry. I definitely, Val's point is so accurate. We're the people, our senior managers have been in housing for a really long time, but haven't necessarily either been housing officers or that generic role, or haven't been one for about 25 years. So things have changed a lot over the years. And whilst they still, whilst it's great that they're still around, equally they are a little bit out of touch now with what matters to residents. And we hear it every day, all day. It would be, I think, again, what Lizzie was saying, it would be great. I would love for senior managers to have the opportunity to sit with residents and listen to what matters to them now.
That's not what I was saying.
Pardon?
That's not what I was saying. I wasn't saying I wanted to sit with my landlord senior managers so they could listen to what I was saying. I was saying I'd like to be paid to train them to improve their practice.
Oh, okay, sorry, I've reworded what you said perhaps, but along those lines though, that's what I'm saying. It's I think it's important that they remain in touch. I feel like sometimes they're out of touch, but equally that they don't always welcome the views from their frontline staff and who do really want to make the difference, but unfortunately don't have the powers to make the changes. It's them that hold, they hold budgets and they make the decisions that kind of impact the front line. So
why do you think they don't want to listen to them?
I don't know, Lizzie. I really don't know. We've got some of our senior managers do walkarounds, but they pick and choose where they go, and before they go, they ask for things to sort of be, put right. So they'll quickly send someone out, quickly make sure it looks okay before they go out, and then they go out, which I don't agree with. I don't agree with that approach. I think that's wrong. I really don't know is the answer, because I know. As I've been in housing just over 10 years, and I've gone from assistant up to where I am, my role now, and I wouldn't, we've all got a common interest here, and that's we're all here for our residents. So I don't understand why we don't want to listen to them and make these important decisions that affect them ultimately. So yeah, I couldn't tell you. I'd love to know though myself.
Yeah,
I think it's an interesting one from the sector perspective, and I'm talking from a recruitment side here about how many, particularly larger organisations as well, have recruited very senior roles from people outside of the sector. And I think it does speak a lot of, I think it says a lot sometimes in terms of the direction of where a business wants to go when that lived experience aren't the ones that are actually managing the services. Mal, I'm going to bring you in, then I'm going to go to the chat, and then to Alexandra for like the last 3 minutes. So Mal, over to you. Still there, Mal?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, got
Sorry,
you.
I was talking there. I was on mute. It's just we want to really stick up for some of the senior management. So some of my clients have adopted MWA, management by walkabout, and the chief exec, FD, and a lot of the exec board do random management by walkabout days. So they might jump in with an operative. They don't tell the operatives which one's going to get picked. Might jump in with a housing officer or an estates officer, or a technical officer, and just spend the day with them out on the patch. And they've now started to attend estate inspections as well. And it really grounds them into the service. It's reflecting what you're saying, that there are senior executives out there who are keen to learn and get out there.
Absolutely agree. It's certainly not tarring all with one brush, but if something like these recommendations are going to go forward, if everyone can be doing more of it, then all the better. And if it's holding people to account, and I think accountability is a massive part of where I'd like to see, as personally, the word accountability didn't come up in any of the recommendations, and I think that's maybe a bit of a point that was potentially missed, because when we talk about this multi-agency, Rachel Ojadeo before she left said that community hubs can help tackle stigma with a multi-agency approach. We worked on the voluntary role. Val Knight, community hubs are a good idea within the correct areas. Sarah and Rachel both really enjoyed this session. And Janine Hayward, I do feel we're listening to it futures. Some frustrations come from how long changes may take, but I do believe we get heard when people are given the opportunities, and we have quarterly core business calls and visits with colleagues. And where a couple of people are having to go, but I think that piece around accountability, when we talk about these multi-agency meetings, maybe that's where it falls down. Because people don't want to be accountable. I said, oh yeah, I'll help, but I'm not taking a lead, or I'm not doing this because our organisation doesn't want to be responsible for it. And I don't know if that's something you're coming across at all, Alexandra, but
this is where we need to have tenant influence, and tenants need to be the ones who are holding their providers and staff to account. And this is what we're trying to get. We're trying to get this hierarchy in a balance. But yeah, I've really enjoyed today. Thank you very much. It's a daunting one because it is so new and we don't have the answers to everything, but we really just want to work with everybody. So on the back of this, if you want to get in touch with me, please do, because as we're developing the action plan, we'd like to speak to everybody to help develop that. We've got a webinar coming up, which is open to everyone. It's not just member only. I'll put it in the chat. Oh, I think I've just accidentally sent it direct to Lindsay, but I'll put it in the general chat. And that's coming up in, might be next week.
Send it to me as well, and I'll make sure it goes on the mailing list and the LinkedIn roundup. That'd be great.
I will do.
As Sophie said there, managing agents need to have some form of training in terms of social housing as well. And that's a whole nother thing. But when we talk about multi-agency, you can have a tower, a block of flats, and it's got 4 different people managing it. And so where you're meant to go for the accountability side is really hard.
100%.
Alexandra, thank you very much for today.
Thank you.
I'm happy to share all of those around. If there's any last thoughts, please feel free to share them. But if not, I'll make sure everything gets shared around so that obviously you've got the webinar coming up. And when's the action plan looking to be released?
The draft action plan is going to be in April, start of April. And that'll have everybody's input in that, but it's just developing as it goes. So this time in, a couple of months' time, we're hoping there've been a lot of progress. We're hoping that people can start to put actions against the recommendations. But just keep in touch, just keep us updated. We want to share what you're doing, the good practice, not just the bad stuff. People are doing good stuff as well. It's not just all doom and gloom. People are working and doing really well, doing excellent stuff. So yeah, just do keep in touch, and then we can do work around the action plan. That would be brilliant.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you everyone else who could come along.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Really looking forward to seeing where this goes next. Because I think, as you said, it's just the beginning, but at least something is being put together, and we'll see what comes out of it. Next week, to anyone who wants to join the roundtable next week, it's a really interesting one actually. There's a business in London who I'm supporting, and they support women who have been victims of domestic violence, but who are on a spouse visa. So they've come through, they're on a spouse visa, they are suffering domestic violence, they're trying to flee, but if they leave, they're in violation of their visa, and where do they go? So it could be a really, really interesting one. You're all very welcome. The registration for that will go up tomorrow. In the meantime, I'm going to go get some Lemsip, but please all look after yourself. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you all shortly.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.